Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in, and welcome to the latest iteration of the Distinguished Practitioner series from the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford. My name is John Kieschnick. I'm a professor in the Religious Studies department here at Stanford, and my specialty is Chinese Buddhism. And I'll be the interviewer for this evening's event. Before we begin, I want to thank the Chao family, whose generosity has made this series possible, this Distinguished Practitioners series. And the idea behind this series is to keep scholars and teachers and students in touch with Buddhists who are active in the world today. And this series is a valuable reminder to people like me, people who mostly work on texts and artifacts, that Buddhism is more than just texts and archaeology. It's a living religion that's affecting and is affected by contemporary Buddhists. For this series, we've tried some different formats in the past, and this is the first time we're trying an interview format. It's also the first time we're doing a webinar format, but also the first time we're doing this kind of interview format. So we'd really appreciate getting your feedback on what you think and what you think we might do better. We're very fortunate to have as our guest today, Venerable Miao Guang. Thank you so much for coming. Whose current position is in the Guangshan organization. And that position, as well as her life experience in Taiwan, in Australia, and in other countries as well, gives her, I think, a very valuable perspective on the state of Buddhism today, especially in Taiwan, but also in other parts of Asia and in the West. So first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you, Dr. Kieschnick, and thank you to Professor Harrison. It's a true honor to be in your presence. And I would also like to say thank you to the Zhao family for allowing me the chance to be a part of this series. It's a true pleasure and honor.
Oh, thank you. So my plan is to ask you a series of questions that kind of take us through your life and give you a chance to reflect on your experiences. Our only time limit is about an hour and a half. So I thought the two of us would talk for maybe 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the webinar to questions from our viewers. Ralph Craig, whose name you can see. Hey, Ralph. Ralph Craig is a PhD student in the Religious Studies department here at Stanford, and he will facilitate the questions and answers section at the end. So if you notice at the bottom of your screen, you have a button that says Q&A if you move your cursor. So you can click on that button whenever you have a question and write it out. It would be nice if, in addition to when you ask a question with the Q&A button, if you could say where you're from, just to make the experience a little bit more personal. And Ralph will pick out some of these questions, as many as we can fit in, and read them out at the end for Venerable Miao Guang to respond to. We also have a chat button, so you can chat if you want to, but those questions aren't going to be read out at the end. So for your questions, please use the Q&A button. Okay, so let's start. I wanted to start at the beginning with your childhood in Taiwan. My own specialization is in biographies of monks and nuns, especially like the Gaoseng Zhuan. And in those biographies, they almost always start off with the family background, and especially like to say, you know, when a monastic came from a prominent family of famous scholars or officials. And then most of the eminent modern monks in China of the 20th century often came from very humble families. So can you say a little bit about what your family background is?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kieschnick. I was born and raised in Taiwan in a family of 5. And my father came from a Hakka family, which is about 1.5 hours drive away from Taipei City. And he was a dental technician who basically started his family during the 70s in Taiwan. That's when the economy in Taiwan took off. And I would say I had a more than humble upbringing. I was quite well provided for, and it was a period of prosperity. But what I discovered between my parents, to be honest, was that they weren't happy despite the economic prosperity that we were well provided for. You know, we lived under a nice roof. The fact that they didn't seem to enjoy a happy marriage somehow turned my mother into a search for a religious belief. But we also understand that in Taiwan, it's a huge mixture of Taoist, Buddhist, and Iguan beliefs. And so in the many temples that she visited, that she brought us along, we saw a good mixture of Taoist statues, Guanyin Bodhisattva statues, and Buddha statues. And most importantly, there was a lot of chanting and praying in my mother's search. And what I especially appreciated or noticed was the fact that every time she turned away from the deity statue or the Bodhisattva statue after the quiet dialogue or prayer, there always seemed to be some kind of peace and quiet on her face. This momentary escape from the daily chaos, the family fights, you know, the daily life stress. And so I guess that was my first experience with the so-called experience of the Buddhist religion. And this pretty much continued when in 1989, my father decided to take the entire family over to Australia. For a couple of reasons, the after effects of the civil war in Taiwan, the traditional ways of education did not really please my father. For example, my older sister, who was 3 years above me, she always came home with bruises and somehow wounds on her arms and legs. The reason being that the teachers in school back then in Taiwan used a lot of corporal punishment as a way to educate their students that they must do well in tests. And so it was basically a countdown for 100. Any marks you are away from 100, that would be the number of times that my sister would be struck. And so for that reason, my father decided to look for a better educational background. But I would say my upbringing in Taiwan had a huge influence on my religious perspective because I got to really see what religion was like in Taiwan. Probably a huge separation from daily life in the fact that there was a lot of praying and chanting. And another reason that being that whatever we took away from the temples, it probably involved largely about divination and little about how we were able to improve our personal relationships. And the second influence in Taiwan was that we were raised, again, in a very stressful way for the fact that the teacher punished us a lot and always told us to be quiet, to just listen. And so that's basically where I came from in Taiwan, that started to have a change in Australia.
How old were you when you left Taiwan?
I was 11.
11. Okay, so you did have some experience with the educational system and
Yes.
did you go to after school classes at that
Yes,
age
I
as well?
I completed primary education in Taiwan, and after school education started, it probably only after the 6th grade. So we started to attend after school cramming programs to get ready for the junior high school tests.
And you said that you went to temples with your mother, which is in Taishu's autobiography. He says the same thing. It was going to these temples with his mother, and it was basically you and your mother. Were your grandparents involved or other members of your family on those trips?
Okay. It was mainly my mother and as well as my brother and my sister. I'm the youngest. But another person who had an influence on my religious experience was my grandmother. My grandmother was a very pious Iguan Dao devotee. And so she observed vegetarianism all her life. And she looked after my family in Miao, again, about 1.5 hours drive away from Taipei City. And she pretty much never left the house. She had a small farm next to the house where she grew vegetables that she gave to us. As a mother of 6, she was always hardworking. But what I also see was the fact that every Lunar New Year, she would spend the entire first day, the New Year day, visiting about a dozen temples. paying respect to the deities and gods.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see in her practice the devotion to life. And I also see a lot of strength in this 1.4 meter tall woman, that she was very strong and very devoted to her daily work. She was very firm about her faith as well.
But she didn't push you or other members of the family into Yi Guan Dao.
No. Basically, I was not able to communicate with my grandmother because she only spoke Hakka.
Oh, interesting.
So I could barely understand Hakka. But what I could understand from her when she saw us was to make sure that we always ate well and we took a bath on time and that we were always with our family. Yeah, so I think it was a lot of family values that my grandmother gave to us in the very short times of interaction.
I used to teach for a while. I taught English in a Buddhist seminary in Taipei, the Guang Yuan. And I taught an English class there. And one day after the class, these students came up and they told me they had a theory of what I had been in my previous life. And I was laughing and I started talking, and it turned out they all had theories about what they were in their previous lives. So it's kind of a strange question, but I wonder whether, is that something that you talk about with other people when you reflect on your childhood and why you were born, where you were born? Is it something you speculate about?
It seems to be a trend, isn't it? People would look at what you do, your interest, and say, "Oh, you probably carried this from your previous life." And so, among Buddhists, we call you a 再来人, like a returner upon the wings of your vows, right? And I guess people are very curious about why Dr. Kieschnick, as an American, spent so much time in Taiwan. And we also came across Westerners, who spent a decade in Guang. And so we kind of turn to him in the same way, in thinking, it must have been your vow or your decision from your previous life. In other words, it was more like the karma, right? You probably came on your karma that decided for you to really be in this place at this time.
But you're going to refrain from speculating about yourself.
I did when I was young, because, I was one who really believed in only what I could see and experience. But I think after getting deeper into the Buddhist practice, my perspective of karma started to change. It wasn't so much a predestined force that brings me to anything. It's actually a type of force that changes as you live. In every moment of your life, the so-called karma will shift slightly according to the way you think and the way you behave. And so when I was young, I used to believe that karma was a punishment and reward system. Right? There was one day I was reaching out onto our kitchen shelf for a can, but I couldn't because I was so short. And my brother came along, laughed at me and says, "Haha, it must have been because you never paid respect to the Buddha in your previous life. That's why you're so short." Right? We used to joke about it this way. Yeah. But I think later on, I came to make peace with the fact that this is what I am, but the fact that karma actually gave me more hope in creating or heading for a better future, depending on what I want to be and who I become now.
Okay, so let's pick up the story then. You're 11 years old and you moved to Sydney, is that right? Or near Sydney?
Yes, Sydney, Australia.
So can you give us a sense of your teenage years?
Okay. It wasn't easy moving to Australia as an Asian. For one thing, I only started learning English about 1 month before I moved to Australia. That was the main thing. Language was the biggest challenge. So every day when I went to school, right, it's like, I guess for me, as a joke or seriously, I finally understood how dogs feel when humans try to talk to them, right? It's like a group of sounds and you're trying to make out what they're trying to say to you by their facial expression, but you still cannot. Yeah, so I think the first half year was quite tough. And then, obviously we learned to pick up the language about 6 months and well into a year. And so as we slowly overcame the language barrier, I think the next big thing was the culture shock. Culture shock came across in me in my school lives. And just as said before, when I was raised in Taiwan, right, the teachers use corporal punishment either with a stick, sometimes a straight slap in the face when we talked in class. Right? You're having a chat with your classmates about what the teacher said. You turn around, a slap comes, and and you're asked to shut up. And so that's the way I learned to be in class. But after coming to Australia, going to Australia, suddenly all of the teachers were looking at me and saying, oh, why aren't you talking? You should speak up, you should chat, speak up, about what you hear in class. That's a better way to express yourself. And so the change from learning to just be quiet and, listen to the ability to listen attentively and be able to converse actively, it was a difficult transformation in me. Given the language challenge as well as my introvert personality, it was difficult. But I was very glad that the Australians were so friendly and they really opened up. They were patient with me and, they gave me time to think about what I wanted to say. And therefore, the encouragement was vital to my getting used to this change of learning and growing up. And the second shock will probably be the difference in religion. Again, I'm the Asian Buddhist in an Anglican school. Mm-hmm. And every Wednesday, they invited the pastor to give a sermon about the religion, the Christian religion. And so on Wednesdays, I would usually hear the pastor talking about us, right? The non-Christians or the heterodox who worship statues, right? Who believe in something that is not right. And so one day, one of my classmates turned to me and asked me, do you believe in God? So immediately I said, no, actually, I'm a Buddhist, so I believe in the Buddha more than believing in God. And that came across as a huge shock to them. So one of them just gasped and said, no, you don't believe in God? Do you know that you'll be going to hell? Right? And so that was the days when I wasn't sure how I would respond. But later, as I entered year 11, year 12, as I became more familiar with the Buddhist teaching, I started to learn to have fun, because in my mind, the most important thing is not to only defend your faith, but to really establish a common ground where we can share our beliefs across different faiths. So well into year 11, when people still say to me that, if you don't believe in God, you're going to hell, I started to tell them, oh, no, I'm not going to hell. I would say, you are going to heaven, as a pious Christian, but as a Buddhist, I'll be going to Pure Land. We can still be good neighbors. And that sparked their interest. They started to ask me, what do you mean by Pure Land? And so I would tell them, a Pure Land is where only good people live there. They share, good teachings. They help each other. They're always kind to one another. So that opened up a conversation between me and my Christian classmates in school.
And were there other students of Chinese background in your school? Was there a large Chinese community at the time?
No, in 1992, I was the only Taiwanese student in my school, alongside one Korean student and one Japanese student. And the remaining Asian students were all Australian-born Chinese. So we were kind of the minority. But I was grateful for that, because it gave me like full immersion into the Australian culture and language.
And it sounds like you were kind of proud to be a Buddhist. It seems to me like that would take a great deal of courage, because usually when you're a teenager, you just want to fit in. You want to be like everyone else. And it's not till you're 16 or 17 years old that you want to be different.
Well, in one way or the other, I already made peace that I wasn't going to fit in with the students. That was a fact. So I learned to with the fact by remaining friendly and open and willing to participate. And so it was quite fun when students turned to me and say, oh, I can't touch your lunch because you're Buddhist. So I said, oh, what's wrong with touching my lunch? You can eat my lunch. And so they're saying, you're a Buddhist, I'm a Christian. I'm not allowed to touch your personal belongings. And so, I opened it up. I said, okay, why don't you try and see what happens, And at the end, my friend didn't get struck by lightning. And so they felt more and more okay, to really accept me as a part of their group. So it was interesting to watch, and I'm glad that I did not take an offensive and resistive stance when they questioned my belief. That's all I wanted to do.
Do you remember in those days what sort of what your interests were, what your favorite books or movies were?
Oh, I was really into playing tennis. Every day after school, I would ride my bike into the nearby tennis park and play tennis with my classmates. That was one of the ways, I could interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I guess in the 1990s, the most popular television was Beverly Hills 90210. So the only reason I watched it was so that on Monday, when my classmates talk about it, I know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But I also did a lot of reading. I enjoyed reading the classics. That was the days when I started to become better at English. So I started reading Charles Dickens. I started to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and also the novels that my English teachers introduced to me. So it was a wonderful way for me to be in my own world when I did these readings after school. And even well into university, I think one of the most influential reading was The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco,
Mm-hmm.
right, who really talked about religion from the perspective of semantics and really, looking at knowledge as a taboo, as a sin. And so it was an amazing way for me to really explore the world of Western religion from a small perspective.
And how about Buddhism? Were you still going to a local temple with your mother? Were you reading Buddhist sutras or?
My visit to the Buddhist temple was a weekly basis. It was on every Sunday. But as my Chinese was only at sixth grade level, I had trouble reading the Buddhist text. But every Sunday we chanted the Amitabha Sutra, and we also chanted the Universal Gate chapter of the Lotus Sutra about Guanyin Bodhisattva. And so rather than understanding the contents of the text, I think during my first 6 years in Australia, when I read this Buddhist text, it was mainly about establishing my affinity with Amitabha Buddha and Guanyin Bodhisattva. But that also caused some issue because as we read about Amitabha Buddha, it was always about where we go after we die.
Hmm.
And so one thing I remember about my grandmother saying to me when I was 8 is, you must chant Amitabha Buddha. Keep chanting. So when you die, you will go to the Pure Land. But in my mind, I remember my question was, okay, grandma, I'm only 8, right? Instead of teaching me how to die well, can you show me how to live well first? And so, in those days, I wasn't really able to gain much answer out of the Buddhist sutras. It wasn't until my university days, well into year 2000, I started to learn something deeper and profound.
So let's move into that period, move into the 2000s when you're 20 years old or early 20s. And then you went to university at the University of New South Wales. So
Yes.
was that a very different environment from what you'd experienced before?
It's definitely a much bigger community. And my biggest takeaway from being in university was the fact that you have to really learn autonomously. Again, coming from an Asian upbringing, we're always ready to sit there and receive the information from the lecturers and the teachers. But one big shock was that whenever I came into the tutorials, all my classmates were ready. They had read the material beforehand. They had thought about the material. I majored in Asian studies. And so I selected a lot of courses in Confucianism, studies of Mencius, and Taoist beliefs. And even as an Asian, I wasn't as ready as my classmates to talk about these values. And so that's when I learned to realize that I must always, learn proactively, not to wait for knowledge and information to come to me, but instead I should be ready to talk about what I have already learned. This was not common among Asians, although it's a very common and normal thing in the West, but many Asian students weren't this way. And so I think learning about religion in the same way, religion in the East told us a lot about be good, right? Otherwise you receive bad reward, and listen to the teaching. But in my experience, when I exchanged my Buddhist learnings with my university students, they were very different. They weren't ready to say, okay, tell me what this is about, but answer my questions to why, we should wait for the reward of karma. Yeah, so I would say the after effects of being educated in Asia somehow carried on into university. But I also appreciated that challenge. It means that I have to change the way I learn. I have to change the way I think.
And was there a community of Buddhists in university? Were there Buddhist student associations, or were you still pretty much on your own?
There weren't a lot. The Buddhist societies were established according to nationalities of the students. So
Right.
for example, there was a Taiwanese Buddhist society, there was a Malaysian Buddhist society, yeah, but there wasn't an Australian Buddhist society, at least not that the one I knew. But what I did was I mainly spent my time in Nantian Temple in Australia. Yeah, it's a branch temple built by Venerable Master Xingyun, the founder of Guang. And over there, I started to visit and started to do a lot of volunteer works in the form of translation and event coordination. So those were the days when I spent the weekends. So really starting to interact with Australians who come to the temple to learn about meditation, to learn about the Buddhist doctrines. Yeah, so I wasn't very involved with university life. My only purpose in university was to really be there for the classes and complete my assignments. But I became very involved with life at the Buddhist temple outside of university times.
And can you remember a moment when you started to think about the possibility of becoming ordained one day?
That's a good question. Every time when I'm asked, why did you become ordained, right? My immediate answer would be, why not? And the reason being that I pretty much grew up around monastics.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in my teenage days, on my weekly visits to the temple, I spent the entire days with the Buddhist nuns at Guang. They were very friendly. They were very open. They were always ready to talk to you and kind of address your concerns and problems. That changed my impression about Buddhist monks and nuns. Right? What we used to watch on TV in Taiwan is that Buddhist monks only meditated and chanted. They don't talk to you. They don't look at you. They don't interact with you. But the Buddhist monks at Guang were very different. Yeah, they were very engaged in the activities at Guang. And they paid attention to what their community needed. And so at age 15, I already realized that this could become one of my choices because I admire the way Buddhist practitioners live their lives. For one thing, they don't need to spend much time about their hairstyle. They don't need to think about what they need to wear. I love that. I love the fact that you can wake up in the morning, take only about 5 minutes to get yourself ready so you can leave your house to do something. So that means you don't spend too much time on yourself. Instead, you can dedicate more time onto how you can be of service to your community. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that way of lifestyle, the openness, the freedom from, I guess, the bonds of family duties, the bonds of money, that allows them to really focus on their spiritual cultivation was what really attracted me to the idea of a monastic life.
In the autobiography or the memoirs of Hengqing Fashi, this Taiwanese nun who became ordained in the 70s, she talks about how she waited really until her parents died before she took ordination because they wanted her to get married. And even then, after her parents had died, she had all these objections from her brothers and sisters. So she decided to get ordained in California. So she was always had that pull of the family ties. How about you? How did the family react? Or did you talk to them about your ideas about becoming a nun?
Yes, my father called my renunciation a family revolution. As much as he realized I was kind of headed towards that path on the day when I broke the news to him, well, my father has always been an independent man. He started his business at age 19, right? My grandfather rarely provided anything for him. So he remained strong, even in the days when he took us to Australia, when the financial burdens became so strong, so heavy, he never as much shed a tear. He was a very strong man, an amazing father who made sure that we were well provided for. But I remember on the day when I broke this news to him, he burst into tears. Yeah, he was really, really upset. He was just sad. He could not accept this. And so it took me about a day to communicate with him. So I guess it was a difference of belief, because to what life meant to my father is that he must provide for his family, raise his children, so his children will lead a normal life. And by normal, it would mean to get married, have a good job, and look after his family. And suddenly I am forsaking all of this. So it was hard on him. My father even threatened to sever my connection with him.
Oof.
And somehow, one way or the other, he turned to my mother. He turned against my mother for this, because he felt that I was under the influence of my mother, who took me to the temples. Right. So the conversation was not a pleasant one. He said, if you don't give up on the idea, I'm going to divorce your mother. I'm going to sever my connection with you. But at the end of the day, I told him, I was really grateful for the way my father raised us. And I'm very grateful for the fact that he gave us an opportunity to have a choice in what we wanted to do in life. So I asked for him to really watch how I grow as a Buddhist nun, see what I do, and, become a part of the community I am. And once you see it, once you know what I'm doing, maybe you will change your mind. So unwillingly, he still, quietly, consented to my choice. But we did not speak for 2 years. If I called him, he wouldn't come to the phone. When we finally met each other in this appearance, he couldn't bear to look at me, because he didn't know how to face a daughter who became renounced. Yeah, but it all changed after he started to see what I do at Guang. Yeah.
Which is after what, several years, you mean?
It was after I became renounced in year 2000, right after I completed my final assignment in UNSW. I did not even attend my graduation ceremony. Yeah, on the day of my graduation ceremony, it was also the day of my full ordination ceremony. So instead of putting on the bachelor's robe, I put on my monastic robe.
Mm.
Yeah. And so in those 3 years, I really focused on my life, in Foguangshan Monastery in Taiwan. That's another story. But to cut the story short, I think also other events about his sickness. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor at age 70. But in the end, what really helped him pull through was the Foguangshan community, and as well as me and my mother's belief that gave him strength. I think that was the turning point, which is about 13 years after I became renounced. Yeah, it was a long journey, but every day in those 13 years, I continued to really dedicate my daily practices to my father, in hope that he too will really see the peace and wisdom that Dharma can bring to him.
And for your other family members, there was less conflict, or was it similar?
Well,
you don't have to get into too much detail if you don't want to.
It's okay. It's okay. I've talked about this, but my sister and my brother could foresee my decision, years before that, but they couldn't bear to see my father so upset. Mm-hmm. And so they brought out the Confucius value, right? The Chinese 身体发肤受之父母, right? Your body has been given to you by your parents. How can you be so, you have to be responsible and dutiful. And to shave your head means you're hurting your body, right? They wanted me to think about this. And so I told them at the same time, I'm just shaving off my head. I'm not cutting off my ear, right? I'm not hurting myself. The most important thing about following the monastic path is really not causing any harm to myself or others. In fact, I was confident with the fact that if I did well in my practice, they will see the change in me. Yep. So my sister and my brother, in the end, became very supportive of me. They thought of ways for me to reconnect with my father. Yeah. So I felt that it was a very cozy story, and I've always been really appreciative of my family. The fact that I have renounced, but at the same time, the renunciation brought me closer to my family.
Do you think that's changing when you have interactions with younger monastics, or are the dynamics pretty much the same?
It seems to
the
be
response of their families, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's mostly the same, right? The anger, the sadness in the family, the fear in the monastics and not how to convey the idea. So as I come across younger monastics who experience the same event, same circumstance, all I would say to them is, first of all, you need to be firm in your decision. If you don't know why you become renounced, of course, your family can prove you wrong. And secondly, be kind to your family. To them, it's like losing a family member. So what you need to do is to give them time, but at the same time, share your life with them. Right? Any moment you stop sharing your life with them, you are on no ground to ask for family support. Yeah, best is when they understand what you're doing, and then doesn't matter how difficult it is. I think at the end of the day in life, when you're going through the hardest of time, it will always be your family who will be there to support you and help you.
Okay, so now you've ordained, and after how many years you returned to Taiwan? After what is it, 10 years?
I became ordained 6 months after, so I became fully ordained 6 months after I left Australia. And I've pretty much lived in Taiwan since then. So it's been
I see.
about 20 years.
And
But although
then,
I'm based in Taiwan, I do a lot of traveling.
yeah. And then I think of these monastics, when you read monastic autobiographies like a Zhenhua or a Shengyan, they were very disillusioned at first with Buddhism. So Zhenhua's experience was horrible. And Shengyan too talked about, heroin use in these Shanghai monasteries. I'm assuming your reaction wasn't so extreme, but when you went back to Taiwan as a monastic, did it match your ideal of what monastic life would be?
Mm. Yes, you're right. My experience compared to the Venerable Masters you have mentioned are not as dramatic. For one thing, we're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to become a part of the Buddhist order that follows the Vinaya, right? This Foguangshan order has a good system that trains and nurtures monastics who follow a proper spiritual cultivation. Yep. So I think the criteria to entering this monastic community is that you have to make sure that you have no unacceptable, daily life behaviors. So following the basic pancha sila, the 5 precepts, right? The precepts of no killing, no lying, no stealing, no intoxicants. Those laid amazing foundations for us to coexist as a community. I mean, I'm talking about a community of 1,300 monastics in Foguangshan. But out of these 1,300, 500 are dispatched to some 200 branch temples across the world. And so in the headquarters, I spent my daily life with about 500 monastic and lay practitioners inside the temple. And being able to really follow the Foguangshan rules, it kept us in place. I think it was nice for us to know what we can and we're not supposed to do. But I would say, again, the shock came after my educational upbringing in Taiwan, the days of staying quiet, don't say anything, to the days in Australia when say, speak up, don't remain silent. Suddenly back in Taiwan, again, it was the same thing. And in the Buddhist college, my teachers are telling me, don't talk, just listen and do as you're told. Yeah, so it was an interesting cycle, but at the end of the cycle, I realized it was totally different from the starting point, right? It's not the mere acceptance of what people give to you. I think by that time, when I was about 22, I was learning the ability to think autonomously, right? To think under the guidance of the Dharma. What does it mean by impermanence, right? Nothing is ever the same. And so I too suffered in the start when I could only do what I was told, right? Sweep the floor only at this time of the day, eat at this time of the day, and you only wash your bed sheets on Mondays and so on. But I realized in order to manage a large community, right, it's a two-way street. If we don't understand where the leaders are coming from, we only make things harder for them. And when things are hard for them, things are not easy for us. That's one thing. And secondly, in terms of our learning and teaching, the days of remaining silent and not talking in the monastery, for me, it became a process of unlearning. And as we say, the Buddhist concept of ego, is what we become attached to, the preconceptions we have trouble letting go of. And so the days of unlearning was really the day when the shells of ego or attachment were being shattered. So the idea of don't just do what you want to do and don't just say what you want to say. We weren't deprived of our freedom, but I think it became a challenge in the Chan monastery to think about why we are being told not to do this at this time. I'm not sure if I'm clear enough, but anyway, at the end of the day, I went to Venerable Master Xing Yun, my teacher. I turned to him and I said, okay, Master, when I was in Taiwan, people tell me to shut up, right? When I was in Australia, my teachers are telling me to speak up. So but back in Taiwan, in Foguangshan, people are telling me to shut up again. So what should I do? Right? And he just turned to me and said, well, shut up when you need to shut up, talk when you need to talk. Right? So that means as a Chan practitioner, you make your own decision, but at the same time, the upaic application of your own thoughts and action, will deem whether it's actually suitable or relevant to where you are and who you are with. Yeah, so he always kind of talked to us in a very Chan way that allowed us to think very openly about what we're learning and what we're going through.
So do you think, it sounds like your expectations for monastic life at the beginning were pretty realistic, like you knew what monastic life would be. Is that fair? Or did you think it would be very different from what it ended up being?
You're quite right, because even back when I was in Australia, I was already attending the weekend Buddhist college programs. And so what the Foguangshan temples do on weekends is that they design a program that starts on Friday evening, ends on Sunday afternoon. For those who would like to join the monastic order but don't have the ability to do so because of work or family. And so during my university days, if I was already going through the monastic programs that followed a similar routine to Foguangshan. And so by the time I returned to Foguangshan, it wasn't really much of a shock, except for my personal issues. Right? Anyone coming from the West, when you come to Foguangshan or Taiwan, the first issue is probably about the squatting toilets. Right? Doctor, I'm not sure if you experienced the same, right? So it's one of those daily life routine, details that ended up not becoming much of an issue at the end.
And did you think, I think the first time I met you was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe, when you were in graduate school. So at that point, were you thinking about different sort of career paths, if you can call it that, within the organization? Did you ever think at that point about going abroad to do a degree, to do a PhD in the US, or to go in some other direction?
Yes, we were very happy to meet you in 2009. I think it was in June, when I completed my MA thesis defense. When Dr. Soloning says, I'm inviting, Professor Kieschnick to become one of your examiners. And that was the day when I completed my MA. So certainly any MA student who, comes to this stage of their academic life would think about where they would go next. But at the same time, what concerned me was, what can I do with what I have already learned in the MA program for my order, for Foguangshan? Well, in Foguangshan, there are two types of education endeavors. One is the monastic endeavor, the Buddhist college. It's for people who become renounced or who want to follow a monastic life. So they stick to a strict monastic routine. They wake up at 5:30. Right, they follow the Vinayas, they follow the class schedules in what they learn. Different topics, right? Buddhist etiquette, sutra studies, doctrinal studies. And the other type of education endeavor at Foguangshan are the what we call the general or the normal universities in Taiwan, in Australia, in Los Angeles, University of the West, and now in the Philippines. And these universities lead regular academic programs for any student in and out of Foguangshan who want to pursue their academic studies in Buddhism or Buddhist studies. And so what I had to think about is if my order has already invested in 3 years of my time to do studies, maybe I should follow the examples of many who complete their MA degrees by, first of all, acquiring 2 to 3 years of work experience before I pursue my PhD. And the work experience will involve teaching at the Buddhist college, or maybe, traveling abroad to our branch temples to give Dharma talks, and maybe trainings. And so if I did that, of course, I'll be doing this on my very limited learning based on my gain from the MA degree. But nevertheless, I feel that in those days, what I also did was to establish affinity. There's a saying in Buddhism, right? Before you attain Buddhahood, the most important thing is for you to first establish affinity, because Buddhahood is never attained alone. Without the support of other conditions, you might, get there later, and harder. And so as I learned and as I got to know more people, I think they broadened my horizon as to what I need to do in my academic study. So after that, I started to serve at the Foguangshan Institute of Humanistic Buddhism. This is a research institute established by Foguangshan where we endeavor in promoting the studies of humanistic Buddhism, or basically Buddhism in the 21st century, or Chinese Buddhism, or contemporary Buddhism, whatever you call it. And so this gave me the opportunity to come across professors and scholars, who showed me how you do, you do studies in Buddhism. And so I guess 3 years later, I started to think about, if I should pursue a PhD, because that would give me, greater knowledge and, better chances to really, interact and speak to the professors and, to give me the right conditions to perhaps collaborate in research programs. So again, I turned to my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun, who was about 90 years old. I asked him, Master, I feel that if I have a PhD degree, I will contribute more to the education endeavors of Foguangshan. I mean, there are 5 universities under Foguangshan, at least let me do something with my PhD degree. But again, he turned to me and he asked me, look, which is more important, to have a PhD in life or to have a PhD in Buddhist studies?
Well, I have a PhD in Buddhist studies, so I think that's much more important. No, but you mentioned a couple of times your interactions with Master Xing Yun. And I start to get a sense, when you talk about him one-on-one, sort of his appeal or his charisma, do you have a sense of why he's probably the most, or at least certainly one of the most prominent Chinese monks of the modern era? Do you have a sense of why he has been so successful?
Okay. In this case, allow me to share just a few photos.
Okay, maybe you can do this and then we can open it up to questions from other people.
Okay, so I will do this quickly just to give an introduction about who Venerable Master Xing Yun is, for those who have not yet come across him. So Venerable Master Xing Yun was born in China, but he spent most of his life in Taiwan and then across the world. He's the founder of the Foguangshan Monastery. This is based in Taiwan, Kaohsiung, and the main complex consists of, on the right, the Buddha Museum that promotes Buddhist art and culture. And in the center, the Sutra Repository promotes monastic education as well as humanistic Buddhism. And on the left, you see the Sangha, the earliest complex. That's where the entire Buddhist order at Foguangshan resides, practices every day. And besides that, he also pays attention to the fact that other than a monastic order, there are many able, contemporary people, elites of society, professors, businessmen who want to contribute to the spread of Buddhism. So he also founded the Buddhist Light International Association. So this consists of lay members who participate in temple events and help promote the messages of Buddhism, mainly in the way that how can Buddhism help us enhance our family, interpersonal, societal, as well as worldly relationships. just to be really quick. And finally, the Buddha Museum, which came about in 2011, right? It houses the Buddha's tooth relic, one of the 3 remaining in the world. And in the Buddha Museum, we also hold regular Buddhist exhibitions for people to get to know more about the Buddhist history and art. And so I think based on these 3 major organizations, I feel that my teacher has a vision in helping or allowing the world to see Buddhism in a much different light. And by much different light, I would say back to our topic about Buddhism, in earlier Taiwan. Okay, sorry, just quickly scrolling through. This is what we see, in contemporary Taoist or Buddhist combined temples. You see a mixture of everything, right? And you don't know who you're paying respect to, or you can pay respect to all of them at the same time, one prayer for all kinds of protection. But that was the earlier days when you see only the elder people would be seen praying or chanting, right? And it was mostly about divination, isn't it? Yeah, you go and draw a slip of paper and to ask for a direction from the gods. Or you go to Taiwan, there's a divination street, you give them their name, they tell you whether you will lead a good life based on the name you have, right? But that all started to change when Venerable Master Xing Yun had established different endeavors in Taiwan. So basically under Fo Guangshan, he hopes we're heading 4 directions. First of all, through culture, right? Art, literature, and so on. Secondly, through education. So going from children's home to kindergarten to high school and university, he has established these organizations and drawing experts. For example, Stanley Yan Changshou, who takes part in the education endeavors to contribute to education, and through charity, of course, and through spiritual cultivation. And so when we say what has changed, I think the world has started to appreciate Venerable Master Xing Yun's effort in the fact that he's bringing Buddhism closer to daily life. Right? He brings Buddhism closer to daily life by involving local communities in our events. For example, what you see here is the Buddha's birthday, baby shower. Baby shower for anyone who wishes for their babies to receive some blessing from the Buddha. I think that's one way to kind of bring people into the doors of Buddhism to see what it's all about. And even into the schools, he actually founded a newspaper, and he says, okay, this is one way for us to contribute to better media literacy. How do we educate children to really learn to read what is good for them? And, in young adults, how do you participate through your expertise and skills? For example, singing, and also to really pass down the heritage through the organizations of young adult divisions who participate in community services. For example, this one, it was a quilt making, for them to share the legacy of a family. And they also to go to beach cleanup. They have weekly gatherings, which has worked really well in the past 6 months. As young adults don't have a job, they start to feel depressed. But this kind of group support under his guidance has really, made some changes. And even from young adults to families, as we've said before, when you're learning Buddhism, if as a practicing Buddhist, your relationship with your family hasn't improved, then that means you have much to do. And so one of our ways to really kind of bring families together is to invite them, to join the cheer squads for our basketball team, who play now on a professional level. But the fun thing was when grandmas, fathers, parents were so embarrassed about dancing, when they joined these rehearsals and competition, they end up having so much fun with their children, with their sons and daughters, grandchildren. Yeah, so I want to show this picture, just to kind of share with everybody in the changes in 21st century Buddhism, for us to see that it's really not a reclusive life. It needs to be much more involved with society. It needs to be closer to daily life so that we bring out the best qualities, the so-called Buddha nature within all of us. And as we feel at ease, and more comfortable with ourselves by discovering that Buddha nature, the next step is really about how to help people. I mean, isn't that the way to lead a meaningful life for a Buddhist? To be at peace with yourself and to be able to help people. And so lots of interesting ideas have come, from those who joined the community. For example, this one, it's a mobile library. It opens up like a transformer, right? And the idea is when the wings open up, we drive this to remote areas for small schools, children who don't have much access to books. They can walk into these trucks, they can borrow these books for a week, and a week later when the trucks come back, they return the books and, they borrow different books. So in other words, I would say, back to your question about why the world, starts to recognize Venerable Master Xing Yun as an international proactive Buddhist leader is the fact that he cares about the world, right? The whole purpose of learning Buddhism or attaining enlightenment is no longer about individual liberation. It's more about how many more people can come on board so we share that joy and happiness. And so his charisma is really coming from his openness and his willingness to involve anybody in any way possible. So last thing, he once asked us, if Buddha could grant you 3 things, which one would you opt for? Number 1, compassion. Number 2, wisdom. Number 3, bodhicitta. Okay. And for most people, their answer will be wisdom, because wisdom seems to be the best tool or, weapon, whatever you call it, the best method for us to really live better. But in the end, he said the best answer is probably compassion. You can do without anything, but you can never do without compassion. And your compassion will become your motivation to learn the prajna wisdom that allows you to make a difference in this world. And so even if we put aside all that he has done, I think he has changed my life. He has changed my way of regarding Buddhism, no longer as a reclusive type of religion. It's open, it's universal, right? It's empathetic, right? I think it's ready to embrace people of all backgrounds, all culture, and all religions. That's what I have to say about my teacher.
Well, thank you. I have many more questions, but maybe we should open things up to our viewers if they have questions. So if you have a question for Venerable Miao Guang, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And Ralph will go through and choose out as many as we have time for. And also, if you can write where you are physically, where your geographic location is, that's a way of making the questions a little more personal. Ralph, you want to start us off?
Yes, and the first question comes from Robert from Indiana, who asks, he says, I explained to someone that compassion was giving to someone you don't know with no expectation of any return. I was told this definition was incomplete. Can you expand?
Okay, thank you, Robert, for the question. It's not an easy question. We explore compassion on many levels. First of all, as a Buddhist practitioner, I think a most important step is to have self-compassion. Right? Any practicing Buddhist cannot progress further on the path to Buddhahood without full acceptance of who you are. And that means to accept every side of you, the bright side, the dark side, all kinds of sides. And then as we expand to compassion for others, the key word would be empathy. And the way Venerable Master defines compassion is your ability to always put yourself in others' shoes and then treat others as you treat yourself. Okay. And certainly the moment you start to treat others as you treat yourself, anytime you're kind to yourself, you would not have any expectations for yourself to pay yourself back, would you? So in other words, I would say progressing from having self-compassion to empathetic compassion, we finally arrive at the stance where we regard self and others as one, either in the way as a family, or we are all fellow humans living on this earth, each with the need to fulfill ourselves. But that's not easy, because to really reach that state, that means we need to have the readiness to give up certain parts of who we are in order to help others become self-fulfilled. That's why in the Buddhist Sutra, bodhisattvas are compared to as wooden fire sticks, right? Fire pokers. What do we mean by that? If you put a wooden fire poker into the fire in order to enliven the flame, what happens is the poker gets burned, doesn't it? Yeah, but so true compassion is any moment when you're even, you're not really caring too much about what becomes of you. But that comes with a lot of courage and wisdom. So again, compassion and wisdom needs to work side by side. So it does not become a blind compassion, because we don't want to be a troubled bodhisattva, don't we? To say we start helping people without proper training in the learnings of the Dharma and the practices, without progressing from finding the way to sever our own afflictions first, we will be like troubled bodhisattvas who won't be able to help others properly. Yeah, so that becoming one with all sentient beings, it takes time, it takes vow, it also takes effort. But all in all, I would say compassion is an action. Yeah, let's not talk about compassion, but let's show compassion. And I think your own action will give the best answer to what it actually means to you and others.
Thank you so much for answering that. The next question comes from Mario, who is in the Philippines. And he asked two questions. What is the relevance of HB in addressing issues about mental health and social pressure, especially for teenagers who experience challenges on their career brought about by this pandemic? His second question is, many students in the Philippines suffer from the new normal independent learning approach designed by our Department of Education. For months, there are consecutive cases of death by suicide due to pressures. And the question trails off, but I imagine that it's a continuation of the first question.
Okay. Thank you, Mario from Philippines. I hope you're doing well. Let me refer back to the definition of humanistic Buddhism by Venerable Master Xing. Okay, so usually we would just think of Buddhism as Buddhism. So why humanistic? Okay, and in his answer, he says, if anything we do or learn in humanistic Buddhism does not contribute to the welfare of humanities as a whole or on an individual level, then it becomes meaningless. But how do we achieve that? In humanistic Buddhism, we must always start from the teachings of the Buddha. Right? Never do or teach anything without thinking about what the Buddha said, and make use of his spirit. Never go too far. And what do we hope to do with the spirit or the teaching of the Buddha? Right? And that in his third part of his definition is to bring about something that becomes virtuous and beautiful, right? How do we bring more virtue and beauty into this world? And so in terms of mental health, especially for teenagers, right, I would say the attention can probably be paid to how does Buddhists show their care and concern to people who cross paths with them, especially during the very difficult times of the pandemic. And then we would say the best answer is probably to think about the affinities that we can build with them, right? How do we show our care, concern to them on a day-to-day basis? And so, for example, what the Buddhist Light International Association has tried to do is to send out care packages. And in those care packages, first of all, you receive a packet of rice and food, right? As a message to remind you that please eat well. And It also has some daily supplies, right? Again, to remind yourself that although the world has come to a halt, your daily life must continue. And then the third item inside this package is a small booklet about how do you lead a healthy life based on the guidance of the Eightfold Noble Path. In other words, to remind the young adults, although you are in the absence of your teachers and fellow students, but you still have the ability within you, right, to continue a healthy and well life. That's the second thing. And the third thing is we continue to organize a series of online events, for example, like an online lunch, online reading sharing, and just online singing, game, as well as just an online regular chanting. The most important thing is to make them feel that they are still connecting to other people, that they have a chance to talk to people, that they're not alone. So Mario, I think you're in a very good position to show this support to your fellow students, because sometimes as a Buddhist nun, when we approach the students, they somehow feel the pressure. But as their peer, right, as their friend, as their older brother, these are probably some of the things you can start doing. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. The next question comes from Phyllis, who is based in Los Angeles, who asks, how do we develop patience, especially in the time of COVID?
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. Speaking of patience, it translates back to Chinese as 忍, 对不对? And the Chinese word 忍 consists of two parts. The radical of a dao, which is a knife, that is placed above your mind, or 心, 心上一把刀. In other words, you would imagine when somebody places a knife, right at your heart, on your neck. What do you need to do? Right? That's what patience in Chinese actually means. But I hope you've actually referred to one of my Foguangshan online chanting services YouTube channel, when we talked about ways to really regard the pandemic, again, through the guidance of the Eightfold Noble Path. Right? So the Eightfold Noble Path gives us a good step-by-step practice of patience. First of all, right view, to fully accept the fact that this has been caused by something, right? And in other words, to recognize the relationship of cause and effect within the circumstances that arise in our lives. Yes, it is happening. It has been caused by something, right? And secondly, to come to peace with this relationship, right understanding, means that in order to put an end to this cause, let's now think of a proper condition that will end the effect. And what is the proper condition that could end the effect? Right speech and right action. And so although we cannot change the fact that the pandemic is happening, through the practice of right speech, let's learn to share information that will bring mental peace and better physical welfare to the people around us. For example, proper knowledge about good health, right? Proper knowledge about how to keep ourselves safe instead of spreading false news, false information. So that goes the same for the fourth, which is right action, isn't it? What we do when we come across people, is it important to really put on a mask as a part of right action? And then finally, right livelihood. How do we actually cope with the difficult times when many of us have either lost a job or have really been suspended from our workplace? And finally, right effort, right? The Buddhist teaching of right effort means we continue with the previous five. Then right concentration, can the Dharma continue to ask us to focus our mind on pondering over whether impermanence has taught us to accept and to be at peace with the pandemic? Because if you keep resisting reality, you cannot make good change to reality. Then finally, right mindfulness, right? The practice of mindfulness is trending in the West. But if we talk about the Buddhist mindfulness, again, it's the continuous process of really going through what's happening in your mind And can we, through the practice of Buddhism, continue to purify our mental, physical, and verbal deeds? So I would say patience is a step-by-step process. You don't just hold your breath, right? Withdraw your tendency to want to express your thoughts, but rather I think a better process, thought or action will certainly lead to a better effect. So that's my answer for you.
The next question comes from Stacy from Massachusetts. And she asks, based on your experience, would you say a Buddhist nun's experience is different from a monk's? If so, in what ways?
At Guang, right, the Buddhist nuns are referred to as a 丈夫. On the day we become renounced, we were being reminded that from this day onwards, you are a 大丈夫. 出家就是大丈夫, right? In other words, you become a being of great responsibility, right? The word 丈 and 夫, clearly has the strokes carried across your shoulder. And so to become renounced means we renounce the daily or the circular concept of male and female, despite the fact that we cannot overcome our biological differences. But I think at Guang, we do see Buddhist nuns, right, who are involved with construction of schools, right, who goes into the slums, to deliver support and welfare to the children. We have a Venerable Jeten who is now residing in Malaysia, who used to serve in Brazil. You would see her stepping into the slums next to our São Paulo Zulai temple. And she talks to the residents of the slums who may be drug dealers, who may carry guns, who may be gangsters. She talked to them as if they are just her fellow human beings. She's never fearful. And on that day, a fellow Brazilian young man who traveled with her walked through the slum in a very different mindset. He was constantly scared and frightened that he may be shot and robbed. But then when he saw how Venerable Jeten, holds the boys and girls in her arms, and talks to these adults as if they're friends, he asked her, "Why aren't you afraid?" And in reply, Venerable Jeten says, "Well, I don't need to be afraid because I walk when I need to walk. I talk when I need to talk, right? I stick out my hand to show my friendship when I need to do that. That's all you need to do." So in my mind, having really transcended, the circular labels of male and female, I would say at Guang, a Buddhist monk and a Buddhist monk practice in pretty much the same way. As long as you acknowledge the need in sentient beings, you will find the ability to overcome your personal limits. That's all I have to say for this question.
Another attendee asks, whose name is not given, as a Buddhist, how would you convince people that desire is bad for them, given that desire is the driving force behind human progression?
Okay. Is desire really bad for human beings? Okay. If we go to the concepts of shunyata in Buddhism, right? Ultimately, the phenomena do not carry the characteristics of good or bad in them. They're mere phenomena, right? Desires would be a phenomenon that arises out of the need for human beings to fulfill their physical life. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so I would say that was probably one of the biggest lessons for me when I started to learn Buddhism seriously. That is, no longer to really regard anything as totally good and bad. Water can either carry a boat or turn over a boat. Right? So the same is for desire. Therefore, for a Buddhist practitioner who comes face to face with the existence of desire, you might be able to turn that desire into something that becomes more beneficial and contributive. For example, my desire to learn, my desire to receive education, right? My desire to help people, not for self-fulfillment, but simply the desire to really alleviate people's suffering. When your mentality, can be set under that frequency, then desire no longer needs to be regarded as good or bad. Okay. But on the other hand, I guess you're referring to moments when people are really indulging in desire in a harmful way. And I would say this calls upon the profound practice of compassion. And compassion asks you what to do when you see people who are in trouble. Okay. I love the translation of 恶人 in Pure Land Buddhism. Right? The translation for 恶人 in Pure Land Buddhism is not translated as an evil person. According to Mark Blum from UC Berkeley, it's translated as a troubled person. They are in trouble because they don't know what to do. They are in trouble because they are lost, but they're still struggling to stay alive. And so in cases like this, out of compassion, what we can offer is probably not a lesson, but support. And so as circumstances changes all the time, right? Different ways to remedy desire will be very different, but it can only happen when we are fully open to the reality that this troubled person is facing in the context of desire. So I have desires, right? And when I have desires that are unwholesome, I don't regard myself as an evil person. I tell myself, okay, this is another moment for me to think about how I can continue to refine my three karmas, verbal, mental, or speech, or physical karma, so that this desire can be transformed. And in other words, quote unquote, purified.
Thank you. Jessica from Sacramento asks, what is the best way to approach those who have beliefs that are harmful to others? And how should we deal with any internal conflict, knowing that so many people are victims of ignorance and selfishness?
If I may be allowed to answer this question, okay, this reminds me of a Gong'an, right, of a scholar who is about to cross the river. And in the process, he sees the boatman in the process of pushing the boat into the river, crushes a lot of crabs and fish. So he turns to a Buddhist monk and asks him the question. So if in the process of us having to cross the river, these crabs and fish must be killed, whose fault is it? And then in the Gong'an, the Chan master says, it's your fault. Okay. So what does this mean? Right? I love Chan Buddhism in the fact that it teaches us not to overthink anything. Right? And by not overthinking anything, as learning Buddhist practitioners, sometimes there's nothing wrong with focusing on what we can learn first. In other words, what do you need to do in the here and now? You need to ask yourself that question. Okay. And so if you haven't found ways to overcome your own affliction and trouble, there's nothing wrong with focusing on that now before you can reach out to tell other people, hey, we need to do this, right? So let's first walk the walk before we can begin to talk the talk as a way to help other people.
So switching gears a little bit, Mia from Italy asks, could you say something about the past, present, and future of the translation of the Chinese Tripitaka to English and other Western languages?
Okay, so as we come to this, allow me to share a PPT again. So this would concern what I am doing at Foguangshan now. Okay. As we understand that the dissemination of Buddhism cannot happen without translated texts. Okay. And so we at Foguangshan too endeavor in a project called the English Translation Project of the Foguang Dictionary of Buddhism. And the reason we are doing this is manifold. For one thing, the Buddhist Tripitaka is so large. Numata has spent 30 years, endeavoring to translate this very important and large corpus into English. And so far, we have a very wonderful collection of about, can I say 50? Yeah. But there's still a lot more to be translated. And so in our effort, we are thinking, what if we can contribute by offering a tour that can assist more translators in understanding the term faster, more efficiently. And so this project started in about 2005. And this is under the guidance of Professor Louis Lancaster, emeritus professor from UC Berkeley, alongside with the guidance of Mark Blum, Robert Boswell, as well as Charles Miller and many other wonderful professors who are helping us translate the dictionary into English. And let's just say if the task of translation can be daunting, right? What if we start thinking about the contribution to building efficient translation teams? So this is what a Xuanzang translation court looks like, right? You have Chinese monks, you have Indian monks, you have monks from Central East Asia. But in a modern translation court, like we no longer use paper, do we? We use computers, right? And in this group, you're looking at French, Malaysian, Belgian, Cantonese, Singaporean, Taiwanese, Australian translators who come together, each contributing their special experts into the task of translation. Some who can read classical Chinese, some are proficient in English, some are professional translators, some are just, for example, scholars or learners of Buddhist studies who can each put a piece together. So the idea is to follow the concept of the Indra's net or a human cell. Right? When we are each a separate node, we become one. So that hopefully will partly solve the problem of how to translate the daunting, the huge, the mega corpus of Buddhist text into English when it involves 2,000 years of knowledge and language. And some of the tools that we're establishing right now is, for example, the standardization of Buddhist terms. So in our system, when we look at a Buddhist entry, right, we see the many Buddhist terms on there. So the idea is if you distribute 50 entries to 50 translators, they're going to come back with different terms. And so what we do is we begin by translating the terminology, have them assessed and finalized by the university professors. And once they're entered into the system, you will see the words in blue. That means these are the terms that have a translation in our database. So that could save some research and thinking time for our translators. You click on it, we're still developing the project. And the idea is when you click on it, the mouse over or the pop-up will provide a Sanskrit equivalent, an English definition, and also some textual background regarding this term. And also the use of cloud files is to kind of allow online international collaborations so that we each contribute at the same time to speed up the process of translating, copy editing, proofreading, and retranslating. Going from sending one file from one person to another, we now have this file that is live, that is synced on the net. So people of different roles on the translation team can really come on to talk about how to improve the translation. And another function, again, is in the Humanistic Buddhism Reader, we have developed to speed up the translation work of works by Venerable Master Xing Yun, is again to use these pop-up functions. So instead of having to enter a term into a dictionary database, it's a very common thing now. You just mouse over, and it gives you the Chinese, the pinyin, as well as the English translation. And if you prefer more details, it kind of goes into, the language structural analysis and also the cross references, the parallel corpus of which parts or which texts this term actually appear. So you can see down the bottom, the collections that allows you to cross read the material
that share the same term. That gives you more space to think about how you would translate this term. So in other words, with the purpose of all of this, I think what we need to do now in terms of Buddhist text translation is definitely collaboration and collective work. If we can process the earlier stages of the translation work in this manner, by the time we come to our professors to give us guidance or assessment, I think it will kind of save a lot of time. And again, it will involve more people to give everybody a sense of mission in what we need to learn and improve in order to complete the translation of a Buddhist text. But I think most importantly is on a general basis, when we read a translated text, we need to think about, does the content echo with your mind? Does this contribute to your understanding and practice of Buddhism on a general basis? Okay. And so in the Guang Dictionary project, we aim to offer a translation of technical equivalence. By technical equivalence, it's not a gloss. By technical equivalence, we allow the reader to also trace back to the etymological structure of the original language. So you know why we have certain Buddhist expressions, such as, for example, 放香, right? In a Chan monastery, 放香 does not mean put down the incense. 放香 means you release a practitioner from a session that was usually timed by burning an incense. And so if you understand that, then you might be able to translate it better rather than just a free session or a dismissal from a meditation session. Yeah, so we are taking very small steps right now, but at Guangshan, we are hoping to find ways, hopefully to nurture more aspiring translators who can somehow contribute to the process of Buddhist textual translation. That's all I have to say.
So I think we have time maybe just for one more question, Ralph.
So the last question comes from Andrew, who asks, while FSG is an international organization, its members, both monastic and lay, are overwhelmingly of Chinese heritage. How do you think these demographics might shift over the next few decades? And how might that affect FGS in its Taiwanese headquarters as a result?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. This is a very interesting question. And your question will concern the strategies of localization or acculturation for Guangshan across the 5 continents. Okay, and so allow me to use the theory of acculturation by John Berry in attempt to answer your question. Okay, when Guangshan goes to a country, we become a new culture that aims to fit into the local culture. So perhaps 30 years ago, when you go to a country, if you go to America, right, you will see 2 types of local culture. The first is the existing American culture. And the second is the growing Chinese immigrant culture that tend to seek ways to settle down in the country. That means Guangshan needs to tend to both types of cultures. First of all, through language. Second, through means of practice. So across the 30 years, Guangshan has been allowed to thrive across the 5 continents, mainly under the support of the Chinese immigrant communities across all the countries, which is the second local culture. And mainly in these communities, we speak a lot of Chinese, right? But as we turn back to the existing local culture, which is the American, when the 3rd or 2nd generation immigrant Chinese grow up in America, in Australia, you see that they start to become deeply immersed into the Western culture. In other words, English becomes their mother tongue. French, Spanish, Portuguese become their mother tongue. And being able to speak those languages as their mother tongue, that means their mindset is also changing. And so Guangshan is now paying attention to how we are, first of all, able to communicate with the 2nd generation of our devotees who have a familiar sharing with the Buddhist culture, that Fo Guangshan has brought over. That would be the first thing. And what's the problem behind this? The changes in the mindset may not ensure that the values of family legacy, for example, through ancestral worship, continues into the second generation. That means when the first generation immigrants buy a space in the Fo Guangshan crematorium, they now are taking into consideration that their children or future generations may not come back to worship them inside the columbarium. Okay? So where does that leave them? That's one thing. And secondly, where does the crossing points of religious backgrounds for American-born Chinese, Australian-born Chinese, or Canadian or French-born Chinese come? When they go to school, it's mainly Christian or Catholic, but on their weekends, it's purely Buddhist. So this is like my experience, isn't it? Yeah. So what we hope to do is not to segregate their experience. I think, again, there needs to be a common ground for them to decide how they want to harmonize their different religious backgrounds so that when they return to the Buddhist temple, right, they still find a way to fit in, or that they will still regard the Buddhist temple as home. And this will concern the ways of Sunday cultivations, right? You can no longer ask them to kneel and chant. But what if you give them the space to sing, right? For example, in the form of gospels, how do you sing, your praise for the Buddha? Or how do you actually rewrite or redact the Buddhist sutras for young people so that they understand the enigmatic messages hidden behind the Buddhist sutras? Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done. The values of rebirth, the values of karma, and again, the values of the LGBT community. How does the Buddhist community, face this growing young adult community that comes largely from this part of society? But I would say anytime you draw a clear line, you lose them, right? So thinking about how the new culture and the existing culture can continue to evolve and become the new third type of culture, that will probably be a main task for Fo Guangshan in terms of localization. So we serve hamburgers, in Silai Temple, right? But you see the Chinese people walking into Silai Temple to eat the hamburgers with chopsticks. We say, hey, that's totally fine. It's fine. You can do what you like as long as you feel at home. And naturally, what is good for the community at large will become what shall prevail in the end. Yeah, I hope that answers the question in some way.
Yes, thank you. At this point, I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And I want to thank Ralph for his help with the Q&A and Irene for setting this all up. But mostly I want to thank you, Venerable Miao Guang, for taking time to talk to us. I mean, I found it really rich and informative and clear throughout. It was really a pleasure. This is the point, if you were here in person, when we would all give you thunderous applause from the several hundred people attending your talk. But as it is, you'll just have to imagine people applauding in front of their computers wherever they are around the world. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Kieschnick, and thank you again to Professor Paul Harrison and the Chao family. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to be in your presence, and I see this as a hopeful start for my future opportunities to meet you in person again. Yes. I would really love to learn more from you too. It's wonderful, definitely seeing you again after 10 years.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope your time during these 90 minutes has been fruitful.